Imagine a world where women are treated as legal property. They cannot own land, cannot vote, cannot pursue higher education, and are often seen as little more than beautiful ornaments or brood mares. They are raised to be submissive, ignorant, and entirely dependent on men. This was the 18th century, and in this world, a single fierce voice rose up. A woman who dared to shout, "No! Women are rational beings. They deserve the same rights, the same education, the same freedom as men." This was Mary Wollstonecraft. Her book, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, lit a fuse under the patriarchy and became the foundational text of feminism. But while she was preaching universal freedom, her own life was a chaotic storm of personal tragedy, desperate love affairs, crushing poverty, and agonizing depression. She was a woman who inspired millions but couldn't save herself. She attempted suicide not once, but twice. She had an illegitimate child. She was publicly shamed and ridiculed for her radical ideas and her even more radical life. Today, on Deconstructing Minds, we perform a psychological autopsy on the mother of feminism. We are moving beyond the historical pedestal to find the vulnerable, heartbroken, and defiant woman who battled a world determined to break her. How did a life defined by abandonment, poverty, and betrayal forge the most revolutionary ideas about female liberation? Let us deconstruct the mind of Mary Wollstonecraft, the woman who risked everything to speak her truth. To understand Mary Wollstonecraft's lifelong battle for women's rights, we must first deconstruct the battlefield of her childhood. Mary was born in 1759, the second of 6 children. Her father, Edward John Wollstonecraft, was an abusive alcoholic. He wasted the family fortune, constantly moved them from house to house, and frequently beat his wife. Psychologically, Mary grew up in a state of chronic trauma and hypervigilance. She vividly recalled sleeping in the hallway between her parents' bedroom and her mother's, ready to intervene physically to protect her mother from her father's violent rages. This created a profound protector complex, a deep-seated need to defend the vulnerable, a role she would later extend to all women. But her mother offered little solace. Mrs. Wollstonecraft, broken by her husband's abuse, often showed favoritism to Mary's older brother, neglecting Mary and her younger sister. This left Mary with a deep attachment injury and a profound sense of unworthiness. She never felt truly loved or safe. She learned early that male power was dangerous and that female love was conditional and scarce. This toxic domestic environment was the crucible for her revolutionary ideas. Her demand for female education wasn't just an abstract theory. It was a desperate plea for emotional and financial autonomy. She believed that if women were educated, they would not be forced to endure the kind of abuse and dependency her own mother suffered. She fought for women's rights not because it was an academic exercise, but because she literally saw her mother's suffering, and her own, as a direct consequence of patriarchal oppression. Her philosophy was born from the terror of her own nursery. Having escaped the tyranny of her father's house, Mary Wollstonecraft believed that education and reason would be her path to independence. She opened a school, worked as a governess, and then dared to pursue a career as a professional writer, an almost unheard-of profession for a woman in the 18th century. She became part of a radical intellectual circle in London, a place where ideas of freedom and equality were debated with fervent passion. But while her mind was charting a course for women's liberation, her heart remained deeply wounded and desperately sought the love and acceptance she was denied as a child. This created a profound paradox of independence. She preached radical autonomy, but her emotional dependency on men was often her greatest weakness. Her first devastating love affair was with Henry Fuseli, a married Swiss painter. Mary became completely obsessed with him, even proposing a scandalous ménage à trois where she would live with Fuseli and his wife. Fuseli's wife, understandably, rejected the idea, and Mary was crushed. This was a brutal lesson in the limits of free love and the pain of unrequited passion. Then came Gilbert Imlay, an American adventurer and philosopher. He seemed to embody the kind of radical, free-thinking man she admired. Mary fell passionately in love, bore him a daughter, Fanny, out of wedlock, and believed she had finally found her soulmate. For a brief, intoxicating period, she believed she had achieved the perfect union of mind and body, of freedom and affection. But Imlay, like so many others, proved to be unreliable and unfaithful. He was a restless spirit, more interested in business ventures than domestic bliss. He abandoned her and their child in Paris, leaving her in desperate financial straits and crushing emotional despair. Psychologically, this was a massive re-traumatization of abandonment. Her deepest childhood fears of being unloved, unwanted, and alone were brutally replayed. The woman who demanded freedom for all was herself a prisoner of her own vulnerable heart. The betrayal by Gilbert Imlay plunged Mary Wollstonecraft into an abyss of despair so profound that it twice led her to the brink of death. She was not just heartbroken, she was utterly broken. She had gambled everything, her reputation, her social standing, her emotional well-being, on a man who proved to be a phantom. Her first attempt at suicide came shortly after Imlay's abandonment. She wrote him a series of agonizing letters, begging him to return, expressing the utter desolation of her soul. When he refused, she tried to take her own life by consuming laudanum, a common opium tincture of the era. This failed, and Imlay, guilt-ridden, briefly returned, only to abandon her again. The second attempt was even more desperate and dramatic. In October 1795, Mary walked to Putney Bridge over the River Thames in London. She deliberately walked for hours in the pouring rain to soak her clothes, ensuring they would weigh her down. In the dead of night, she climbed over the railing and threw herself into the icy, churning waters below. Psychologically, this was not just an act of despair, it was a desperate cry for control. For a woman who had fought her entire life against the chains of dependency, the loss of agency over her own heart was unbearable. She had preached rationality, but her emotions had betrayed her. To throw herself into the river was to take back the ultimate control, the control over her own existence. Miraculously, she was rescued by passers-by and brought back to life. But these suicide attempts reveal the raw, visceral pain beneath the facade of the rational philosopher. They show us a woman who was literally drowning in a world that refused to grant her the emotional and social equality she so fiercely demanded. Her philosophy was her shield, but her heart was her Achilles' heel. These were the moments when the mother of feminism came closest to being extinguished by the very human vulnerability she tried so hard to transcend. After enduring the agonizing betrayals and the abyss of despair, Mary Wollstonecraft, against all odds, found a brief, fragile period of happiness. This came in the form of William Godwin, a radical philosopher, anarchist, and an intellectual equal who, unlike her previous lovers, truly respected her mind. Their relationship was a testament to her enduring belief in the power of intellect and connection, even after profound heartbreak. Godwin initially disapproved of marriage, viewing it as a despotic institution. Mary, for her part, had already endured the societal condemnation of her illegitimate daughter, Fanny, and publicly championed free love in her writings. Yet their mutual respect blossomed into a deep affection. In 1797, after realizing Mary was pregnant with his child, they made the radical decision to marry. Psychologically, this marriage was a profoundly corrective emotional experience for Mary. After a lifetime of abandonment and conditional love, Godwin offered her stability, intellectual partnership, and genuine affection. He accepted her past, her child, and her radical ideas. He didn't try to control her, he revered her. This was the first time Mary truly experienced a relationship where she was seen, valued, and loved for her whole complex self, not just for parts of her. Their union was deeply unconventional, even by their own radical standards. They lived in separate houses, maintaining their intellectual independence, meeting daily for walks, conversations, and intimacy. This arrangement allowed Mary to retain the autonomy she so fiercely advocated for in her philosophical work, while finally enjoying the emotional security she craved as a human being. It was a brief, vibrant glimpse of the harmonious, rational, and loving relationship she had dreamed of for all humanity. But as with so many aspects of Mary's life, this period of happiness was destined to be tragically short-lived. Mary Wollstonecraft had spent her entire life fighting against the physical and emotional vulnerabilities that plagued women. She argued for education, for economic independence, for the right to control one's own body and destiny. But in the end, her greatest enemy proved to be the most ancient and unavoidable biological reality of all: childbirth. In August 1797, Mary gave birth to her second daughter, Mary. The birth itself was successful, but within days she developed puerperal fever, a brutal infection common in the 18th century, often caused by unsanitary conditions during delivery. The very condition that had claimed her own mother's life, the original trauma that defined her existence, now came full circle to claim her. For 11 agonizing days, Mary suffered. Godwin, devastated, stayed by her side, recording every moment of her decline. Her intellectual friends, the radicals she had inspired, watched helplessly as the light began to fade from the woman who had demanded illumination for all. She died on September 10, 1797, at the age of 38. Psychologically, her death in childbed was the ultimate irony and the final betrayal. The woman who had fought so fiercely against the biological and societal constraints placed on women, the woman who had demanded the freedom of the female mind from the chains of the body, was ultimately conquered by the very biological process she sought to transcend. Her death cemented the idea that even the most brilliant intellect could not escape the brutal realities of her time. Her legacy, however, was just beginning. She left behind 2 daughters, Fanny Imlay, the child of her tumultuous affair, and Mary Godwin, who would later become Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein. The ghost of Mary Wollstonecraft, her ideas, her courage, and her profound pain would continue to haunt and inspire for centuries, shaping the minds of her own daughter and countless other women who sought to break free from the chains she had fought so hard to loosen. Mary Wollstonecraft died in September 1797, and within months her fragile peace was shattered once again, not by life, but by her own posthumous honesty. Her grieving husband, William Godwin, driven by a desire to honor her sincere spirit, published her unfinished memoir, Memoirs of the Author of A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. In this book, Godwin, with the best of intentions, revealed everything. He exposed her tumultuous affairs, her illegitimate child, her desperate suicide attempts, and her radical views on sex and marriage. He thought he was celebrating her authenticity. Instead, he unleashed a storm of public outrage. Psychologically, this was a massive, posthumous re-traumatization. The very society that Mary had defied in life, now, in death, brutally condemned her. She became a pariah. For decades, her name was synonymous with unnatural woman, atheist, and whore. Her vindication of the rights of woman was dismissed as the ravings of a madwoman, its message buried under a mountain of moralistic condemnation. For nearly a century, she was the unspeakable woman, her name only mentioned in hushed tones of scandal. She was seen as a cautionary tale, a woman who dared to live a life of freedom and paid the ultimate price. This suppression of her legacy was a direct consequence of her era's deeply entrenched patriarchal backlash. Society could not tolerate a woman who challenged its foundations, especially one whose personal life was so disorderly. Her true genius, her profound insights into psychology and gender, was deliberately obscured, proving her own point, that women were judged not by their minds, but by their perceived moral purity. Mary Wollstonecraft's story is a profound, searing testament to the cost of authenticity and the price of freedom. She was a woman who dared to live her philosophy, even when it meant social ruin, heartbreak, and despair. On Deconstructing Minds, our psychological autopsy of Mary Wollstonecraft reveals a painful but empowering truth. The personal is political. Her profound insights into women's rights were not born in a sterile academic vacuum. They were forged in the crucible of her own suffering. Her demand for female education was a direct response to her mother's subjugation. Her cry for autonomy was born from her own experiences of abandonment and betrayal. Her fierce intellect was her shield against a world determined to silence her. It wasn't until the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and most powerfully with the rise of second-wave feminism in the 1970s, that Mary Wollstonecraft was finally rediscovered. Her writings were republished, her story re-examined, and her genius finally recognized. She was resurrected from the ashes of scandal to become the icon she always deserved to be, the mother of feminism. Mary Wollstonecraft died in childbed, a victim of her era's medical limitations. But her ideas did not die. They survived the scorn, the silence, and the attempts to bury them. She teaches us that the fight for justice is often a lonely, brutal, and thankless task. It demands personal sacrifice, emotional resilience, and the courage to face ridicule. She wasn't a perfect woman. She was deeply flawed, vulnerable, and often heartbroken. But in her very flaws, in her desperate struggle to live a life of dignity and meaning, she left us a legacy far more powerful than any bronze statue. She left us the unconquerable voice of a woman who chose to scream for freedom, even when the world tried to drown her out. And for that, we owe her everything.